All right, so let's do quick introductions. I'll let every panelist give 30 seconds or so and tell them about who they are and what they do and why they're here. And we're going to start with Maddie Urbish.
I'm Maddie Urbish. I'm the head of government affairs and market strategy for Ørsted Americas. We are an energy development company. We primarily are working on offshore wind here in New Jersey, though we do have a pretty large onshore wind and grid scale solar business as well in the Americas. And my role with the company is to really represent Ørsted in the state of New Jersey with a variety of stakeholders, both governmental and non-governmental. And so I'm happy to talk about offshore wind and clean energy as part of the overall energy mix today with this group.
There you go. Mike, jump on in.
Sure. Mike McCarskey, ELEC 825. We're the labor management fund for the operating engineers, 825. So the heavy machine operators whose guys and gals butts sit in the seats that build all of our infrastructure, whether it be energy, water, roads, bridges, you name it. In addition to the 8,200 men and women, we have more than 1,000 signatory contractors who we represent. So we get to cover the nexus of both labor and management. And then in addition, I'm also a spokesperson for the state's only consumer-focused energy coalition called Affordable Energy for New Jersey.
There you go. All right, now I'm going to ask everybody to keep it down. We're going to bring Eric on next. Eric's a bit of a low talker. He doesn't have much passion. It's tough to get a full sentence out of him. We love him. Eric and I did a piece where we got to talk about Schoolhouse Rock earlier this week, one of the highlights of my journalistic career. Eric, what say you? Introduce yourself to the group in your own way.
Thank you, Tom. Schoolhouse Rock was the highlight of my legal career. So, so my name is Eric DeJezero, and I'm here wearing two hats, but really for three different entities, if you will. So the Fuel Merchants Association of New Jersey represents heating fuel distributors that distribute heating oil, and some of our members distribute propane. And most of our members, if not all of them that are heating fuel distributors, are also HVAC contractors. We also represent the motor fuel distributors in the state. So whether it be a gas station, a trucking fleet, or whatnot, we supply them. And I'll also be adding some commentary today as the lobbyist for the New Jersey Motor Truck Association when we discuss EVs and charging and infrastructure there. Thank you.
So Eric wins the title for the longest business card. I think all of us now have about 9 titles, but Eric's going to do that. Look, as you can see, we're going to have a lot of fun here. We're going to try to keep this light and loose. That's the way we like to do it here at ROI. If you guys have questions, you want to throw them in on the chat, we'll try to work those in. Again, we want to elevate the conversation to where you're at. We're going to start on a pretty serious issue, one that is impacting energy. We're not sure how or why, but it's the elephant in the room. It's the whale in the room, if you will. So I'm going to start with Maddie here, and I'm going to give a couple of, this is really hard because facts are hard to come by in this situation. We know that 10 to 12 whales have beached themselves since December 5th. We know that there is nothing that ties that to offshore wind whatsoever. Governor Murphy's been very strong on that. A lot of federal agencies, including NOAA, have certainly jumped in on that, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But still, I mean, marine life is dying. That's a concern to everybody. Some people are using that as a save the whales. Some people are using that as a trigger for other reasons that are a little bit more nefarious. With all of that vague intro there, I'm going to go to Maddie and say, okay, you're the offshore wind person. What say you?
Really starting it off light and fun, huh, Tom? No, obviously, I mean, it's been very upsetting to see the number of whale deaths in a relatively short period of time, as you noted. I mean, unfortunately, these numbers are not necessarily out of scope with what we have seen in this region and all and up and down the East Coast over the last 10 years. I would like to just say on a personal note, I'm very grateful. There is an amazing team of volunteers, scientists, citizen scientists that work with the Marine Mammal Stranding Center. They have been putting in many, many hours in response to these whale deaths and the beached whales. On top of the work that they already do when it comes to rescuing and rehabilitating marine life. I'm also disturbed by the fact that they have sort of been now the target of criticism and some abusive behavior online and even in person. And so I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail and folks will realize that they are an absolutely neutral group that is working to discover what exactly is going on here with these whales and these whale deaths in a short period of time. As you said, there's a good amount of science already out there. We know a number of factors that could be contributing to it, including sort of fish patterns, the warmth of the water, the fact that we have a lot more whales, which is the good news because we've been able to clean up our oceans. But they seem to be coming closer to shore and more in line with quite a bit of vessel traffic. And as you all know, we have a very busy coast here when it comes to vessel traffic, when either, through the port, or through commercial recreational fishing, recreational boating in general. We just have a lot of boats out in the water there. And now we have more whales. And unfortunately, we're seeing more impacts because of that. As you said, I don't think I need to add too much. We have 3 independent federal agencies with some of the best scientists in the world working for them that have been very clear that there's no evidence that these unfortunate whale deaths are connected to offshore wind in any way. The claims that are being made by some groups that are already historically opposed to offshore wind, really are clearly a red herring. And it's focused on advancing their agenda to stop offshore wind. I will add that we've been very grateful for the partnership that we have had with a number of organizations trying to get accurate information out there. And so we've been able to supply the factual information about our vessels and what we are doing out in the water. And I know other developers have been very open and transparent about the work that we have going on out on the water so that we can clearly communicate that with the broader public as well as other industries. We have what we call a mariner's briefing that goes out on a regular basis that provides updates on our site investigation activities. So everything is out there and accessible. And I will add, there is a lot of work being done on this front from a protective standpoint. We specifically in New Jersey have partners with Rutgers University, their RU Cool Lab, which is probably the best acronym out there, but they're oceanographic experts. We've been partnering with them for several years now on what is called passive acoustic monitoring. And essentially, it's sending out monitors into the water so that we're gathering data on where the whales are, what their patterns are, so that we can inform the work that we're doing around those patterns. We also have partnered with Stockton University on a first of its kind protected species observer certificate program. So training the protected species observers that will be aboard all of our boats, whose sole job is to look for protected species and ensure that we are avoiding them. And so the work that we are doing in offshore wind is very, very protective. Our construction schedules will be defined by migratory whale patterns. We have very strict rules and regulations in place. And it's all in an effort to protect these really important species and the biodiversity that we have here off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean here. And it's a critical piece of our business model. We are focused on not only bringing renewable energy to the United States and to New Jersey and to the world more broadly, but doing so in a way that is sustainable and is focused on protecting biodiversity. So I will leave it at that. I know we've got other things to talk about, but I appreciate the opportunity to address the elephant in the room.
Look, and look, at ROI, everybody knows we've got no dog in any fight. We're just trying to get news and information out there. And when we do that, some of the things that you do in journalism is look for other instances. And look, a couple of things that come out to me are, one, you guys aren't doing much in the water yet anyway. Two, and in places around the US and around the world where they have done a lot in the water, where they have built offshore wind, there hasn't been a history of this. So that would lead you to believe that A doesn't always equal B. And three, Maddie and I, when I were talking about this last week, it's not like Ørsted has these, the Exxon Valdez tankers that are going 100 miles an hour that are cutting through the oceans. I mean, these are smaller boats going at a smaller rate of speed. This is a sad situation. No one's happy about it, but the idea that we need to shut down offshore wind overnight because of it, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. All right, we're in and out of that, which is good. I know that was the whale in the room, so to speak. I'm going to stay with Maddie, because we're going to stay offshore. Give us an update a little bit about where Ørsted is in the process. So this is one of the things that we're going to be talking about throughout the conversation, is that everybody wants something done overnight, and energy infrastructure rebuilding takes a long time. So sort of give us an update on where Ørsted is and where you see the offshore wind industry that Governor Murphy has so pitched.
Sure. So we have two projects in New Jersey, Ocean Wind 1 and Ocean Wind 2. Our Ocean Wind 1 project was awarded by the state in June of 2019, and we're getting very close to construction at this point. We are, I would say, more than halfway through the permitting process with these projects, because they are on federal lands, or in this case, federal water. We have a lease from the federal government. It goes through what's called the NEPA process at the federal level. And so that process is run by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, also known as BOEM. The process itself is quite lengthy. Once you submit your permit, it's at least 2 years of review with drafts that are put out for public comment, lots of interagency at the federal level review, questions going back and forth, making sure that folks have all of the information that they need to adequately evaluate the different aspects of the project. And as part of this, they look at alternatives, and it is a very intensive environmental, cultural permitting review process that we go through. We also have state permits that we are working with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection on, and of course, there will be local level approvals as well. And so currently with Ocean Wind 1, we are awaiting what would be a final environmental impact statement from the federal government. According to BOEM, who has a tracker online where they track the permitting process, the intention is that permitting process would come to a close, and as long as all of the conditions are met, we would receive our permits probably in the middle to late summer, with construction being able to start as early as this fall. But there's certainly lots more going on that front. I will say that we have a number of other things going on at the moment outside of just permitting. We are working with one of our suppliers known as EEW at the Port of Paulsboro. They are starting to put together the monopiles that will be used for this project, which is really exciting. And we saw a number of parts being delivered earlier this year and work beginning there. The site itself is nearly complete, and we've been really proud of the work going on there. The whole site was constructed under a PLA with labor, and I will note that for Ørsted, we did sign what is known as the National Offshore Wind Agreement with NAB2, which is the National Building Trades Organization, and we have a commitment that all of our work, both onshore and offshore, will be completed under project labor agreements with local labor. And so that work is ongoing. We're excited to hopefully get started later this year. Ocean Wind 2 is on a much later timeline, so I can pause there.
Awesome. So now when you say work going on there, there's a fun line about New Jersey that there is no there. When it comes to labor work and energy infrastructure in New Jersey, there's a lot of there. It's everywhere. So I'm going to bring in Mike. We can talk about offshore. We can talk about onshore. We can talk about roads. We can talk about tunnels. We can talk about EVs. You guys, listen, nothing gets done without 825 leading the way. Let's talk about how all of this energy infrastructure, how you guys are working to help make this go, and give us an update on where everything stands right now that you're seeing.
Sure. I mean, obviously, we've the guys and gals at 825. We love to tout how highly trained and highly skilled they are. As you come up and down the turnpike, you'll see our training facility just kind of off the side there. About 2 years ago, under the leadership of our business manager, who's a frequent commenter in your publication, Greg Lallavie, we got the training center credentialed as an accredited technical college. We signed a partnership with Hudson Community College, and actually have just put through our first class of folks that are going through and working towards their both associate's degrees as well as their union apprenticeships. So we're kind of looking at what the future of this looks like as we start looking into the world of energy. We kind of tend to track everything in terms of man hours, right, or work hours. However, the amount of time that people are working on these projects. I mean, obviously, we are large proponents of diversified energy. Kind of things from all over the place. We do a lot of work in the natural gas space. we're happy to build solar, we're happy to build wind. We're ready to go on day one when that kind of kicks off. So, we're looking forward to this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously there's still a lot of discussion around, who's, when construction's going to start. I know obviously Maddie alluded to the fact that there were project labor agreements that have been signed. There's still a number of technicalities that are still yet to figure out. I mean, that's more of a labor discussion and not an infrastructure discussion. So we can table that for a later period of time. But we're just kind of sitting waiting to go. Our guys and gals, they're ready to jump in the cranes. They're ready to get into the equipment. The second it's time to go, we're ready to go.
I think it would be fair to say that with all of the variables, we're talking about a generation worth of work in energy infrastructure alone. I mean, 825 is involved in all kinds of stuff, but if you just talk about energy infrastructure issues, this is a generation of happening that some's going to come in 6 months, some's going to come in 6 years, some's going to come, in a decade. But I think you can see this building out. That's got to be a great thing for a state that has a very strong union labor backing, correct?
Without a doubt, it's a really exciting time, but there's also a lot of clarification that we're looking for. The Board of Public Utility and the governor's office, with their energy master plan, their plan to get to clean energy by 2050, which then became 2040, which is now 2035. Based on last week's, announcement, like I said, we're a little unclear on what that is supposed to be. The other thing we're unclear of is what the role of natural gas is going to be for the future. 70%, almost 80% at this point of all homes in the state are heat using natural gas. And almost 90% of our electricity currently comes from some combination of nuclear and natural gas. And unfortunately, the administration's been a little cagey and at times adversarial with the natural gas industry, which for us in the trades is concerning, because until there is offshore work and until there is offshore transmission work, the total number of man hours in the energy space is widely dominated, via the natural gas industry, and that's just a fact.
That seems like a real good time to bring Eric in to give some thoughts on some of the things that we see coming forward in the future.
I think the important thing for the debate to begin to inform is, to the extent that we as the public are aware of what the governor's plan is. He's been very, very clear about, very clear since before he began running, that solar, 100% electric generation, solar, wind, nuclear, he's certainly been supportive of. And we know about electric vehicles. Those are two things that he's been undoubtedly clear about. So we've got the top of the totem pole and the bottom of the totem pole, but it's everything else in between. And that is not to minimize. I mean, the work that Maddie and Orsted are doing and others in the wind and the solar, it's a very big deal. I'm not trying to minimize that, but that there's for as expensive and big a deal as those are, there's a lot more expense as you get through the distribution system, and then you hear in the transportation industry about kind of the last mile. It's always the most expensive to get something the last mile, and the building electrification aspect, the energy master plan that I hope we'll have some time to talk about, is more than just the last mile. That's not only the driver driving, that's the driver coming in your house, rearranging everything, and the cost there is something that, we certainly have been critical of the governor, and in some instances will continue to be, but I think the governor last week, the big news last week certainly was the advancement from 2050 to 2035 and the EV mandate. But I think a much bigger story was the governor's pivot, very small, but yet significant nuanced pivot as it relates to the path going forward for not only natural gas, but other fuels, and hope that we'll have the opportunity to discuss that.
We're going to get to that, and I can't wait to get to building electrification. I want to get to EVs real quick, because that was something that the governor mentioned, and you're talking about moving the timeline, man, this is going straight up. Again, we'll try to deal with facts. We're not pro-con on anything. The one thought information you can find is that if you put a charger in your home, it's $500 to $1,500. Yes, there's going to be some rebates involved. We'll get it. Do we have enough EV chargers on the road? Look, PSE&G has been lauded and won awards for their ability to do stuff. We did a story about how they're bringing it to Duke Farms and open spaces. BPU wants to bring it to more tourist things. There's one study by who knows who that says New Jersey is the 6th best state to own an EV in. But there's another study that says for all of the chargers we have per 100,000 residents, New Jersey's not even close to being the top, and not even close to being top in New Jersey. So there's a lot of things that need to go on in the EV world, both with commercial vehicles, right, and also personal vehicles, to try to get that going. Are we in position, and I'll leave this for anyone to jump in, from an energy infrastructure standpoint, to make that statement, even if everybody wanted to buy an EV by 2035, are we going to have enough charging stations as we have enough gas stations now to handle all of that?
Tom, I'll start that, and my comments are, I'm going to relegate my comments to vehicle fleets that are trucking in nature, and I'll let Mike and Maddie handle the passenger vehicles. But the one thing I'll say before we do any of it is, before the governor can do any of this, he needs the legal authority to mandate electric vehicles in 2035. There is no such legal authority under state law that I can find, and under federal law, there's a question about, does California has long for 50 years under the Federal Clean Air Act had the ability to set their own standards for criteria, air pollutants, smog, things of that sort. Whether or not they have the authority to set standards for greenhouse gases is an open question, and it's one that will ultimately be resolved by the Supreme Court. So if that's the governor's citing for legal authority, we'll let the court resolve that. But as it relates to state law, there's nothing that I've found that gives him the authority to do it. The legislature could pass a bill tomorrow and give him the authority in a week. In the lane of truck charging, a new tractor trailer, Class 8 tractor trailer that delivers our food, our medicine, our groceries, our everything. A new tractor trailer costs $150,000, a new diesel-powered tractor trailer. A new electric trailer, a tractor trailer, if you can find them, is $450,000. So it's 3 times the cost. And then you have to look at the cost to charge. And this is one, the National Renewable Energy Laboratories, an arm of the Department of Energy, has said, is looking at banks of charging in the legislature. Senator Singleton and Assemblyman Benson have a demonstration project legislation moving through. And the issue with charging for heavy duty vehicles is you need 1 to 4 megawatts, depending on how many you have, how quick you want to charge them. That's the annual consumption of 1,000 to 5,000 homes of fuel. It's the consumption of 1 to 5,000 homes of electricity, I should say. And that's a big deal that still needs to be resolved. And that there are less, just as the governor has pivoted in building electrification, unfortunately, he didn't have a comparable pivot here, because electrification of medium and heavy duty trucks, while it might work in some applications, I heard that 20 years ago with compressed natural gas. Oh, they're coming back to a central facility, we can do it. And certainly many people have put that in, but this is a much heavier lift, and there wasn't that many relative to the number of trucks on the road. So there's a long way to go, and we need to look at other decarbonization pathways, renewable diesel, biodiesel for propane-fueled vehicles, renewable propane, and things of that sort. So as well as renewable natural gas, to the extent that there are fleets that are fueled by natural gas currently.
Yeah, but I'm going to be sarcastic here and say, when I drive by Menon Arena and I see the solar panels above the parking lot, and Maddie's group's going to put 6 or 8 small windmills out in the ocean somewhere, and that alone should cover everything, right? Let's talk about what we can expect from a lot of these renewable clean energies. It's great. Maddie, how long does it take for the offshore wind industry to be able to create the energy that we need to fulfill, which again, look, there's nobody that's anti-clean energy, right? Yeah. We want to get there, but this is why we're having this discussion, because there are infrastructure and cost issues. What kind of timeline are we looking at to get the offshore wind going? That's a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And to piggyback off of what Eric said, the actual grid capability, right? So it's a little outside of infrastructure, but like one of the things, whenever I'm on a panel, I'm asked what keeps me up at night, it's the grid. The grid makes me very nervous, because our current grid that we are part of, which is multi-state, has not really caught up with the changes in technology yet, right? They're getting there, and they're going through a process now of reforming how they regulate some of their own sort of processes. But I sort of, with my hat on, get a little bit concerned about the capacity to meet the needs of electric vehicles. We are very supportive, sort of transitioning to electric vehicles. we are also involved in a couple of other initiatives. We actually right now have a partnership with Maersk down in the Gulf, where we're looking at e-fuels, right? So using our renewable energy sources as a way to power the different electrolyzers that then could create e-fuels for Maersk ships to use, for instance. So absolutely looking into sort of all of the above strategy to find cleaner fuels for types of transportation that we need. But, you know, as I said in the beginning, it is a long process developing, permitting, building these offshore wind projects. And I know there's sometimes been a rhetoric about too much too fast, but again, we won our award in 2019. We had owned that offshore lease for many years before that. We are just getting to the point where we may be able to begin construction in 2023. These are large scale infrastructure projects. And, you know, Mike knows this well, large scale infrastructure takes a long time to build because you need to do it right. And it's complex. And you're talking about a type of expertise that, you know, the operating engineers have or other folks in labor have to use very specialized equipment. I mean, so it is logistically challenging to build large scale energy infrastructure, not to mention the fact that nobody ever wants large scale infrastructure in their backyard or going through their community. And so there's a whole nother aspect of that and making sure that you're working with the communities and communicating with folks. And so yeah, it is not a snap your fingers, let's make all of this work. It is really complicated. And I will give Senator Smith and others credit who have been working on this for many, many years. They understand that it is not that easy. But I will say, putting forward what can seem at times lofty goals, and then you realize, oh, they're not so lofty, we can achieve them, is an important part of the process. And from a private sector standpoint, getting those types of policy signals from different markets, whether it's New Jersey or other markets up and down the East Coast, or, you know, out in the middle of the country where we have our onshore business, having those types of policy signals give businesses the confidence to sometimes take the risk to start on these big scale endeavors in different markets. So that, I don't know if that actually answered your question, Tom, but there you go.
I think it's good.
I mean, but I'll let me jump in on this one for a second,
Oh,
Tom,
please.
because I think in this discussion, whether it be EVs, offshore wind, energy master plan, folks are going to hear us rattle off a whole bunch of acronyms, and we really apologize for that. But there is a tremendous disconnect between administration rhetoric, and this is not just Governor Murphy's administration, this is President Biden's, this is other states all up and down the East Coast across the country, right? There's a huge disconnect between rhetoric and what is actually possible, right? When Jack Kennedy said, we choose to go to the moon, he didn't sign a subsequent EO that phased out Earth at the same time. And that's kind of the general problem that we have here, is these things are going to take time. So take, for example, right, since we have an offshore wind expert here, right, to get to the goal of 11,000 megawatts of offshore wind by now 2035, that is a gargantuan task. Right, the ones that Ørsted are likely going to be building, the big 13 megawatt GE generators, you essentially have to put one in every 5 days from now until 2035 to reach 11,000 megawatts of generation. And that would mean starting that back in January. And that's just not actually possible, right? The facilities aren't fully done. We don't have anywhere near enough the total number of offshore wind installation vessels, right? There's complication around this, you know, so unfortunately with, there's too much governance by press release and less, hey, let's get to the practical realities of this, and let's get it right, as opposed to, and we've said this a few times already on this discussion, we've gone 5 years with this administration and 4 years under the Energy Master Plan. In that time, we haven't installed an offshore wind turbine yet. And yes, that's complicated, but we haven't installed one, right? We had planned to do massive amounts of solar. We haven't installed any solar, right? The Energy Master Plan's goals for battery storage, we haven't added any battery storage. So instead of reviewing where we were, we decided we're just going to scrap the whole plan, wait another year and draft a new one a year from now, right? And hope that we get it right. I mean, the former head of Rutgers Energy Institute, Frank Felder, authored an op-ed this morning saying the same thing.
Felder's op-ed was beautiful, and I'm going to quote from it later. And if you haven't read it, NJ Spotlight, we always tip the hat where credit's due, does a great job covering energy. So They had it this morning, and we'll get to it. One, I got to stop and say, you've already given me the quote of the day when you talk about we didn't phase out the earth on Kennedy. I mean, that's like a Churchill quote. I think that's beautiful. We have our first question. We love questions. Again, we want this to be a backyard barbecue, and I'm glad you guys are here because I don't know the answer. Someone asked, can microgrids help take the stress off of our power grid? Is that something that can, again, solve some of these issues in any way?
They help, right? I mean, it almost feels like a theme that all three of us have touched upon. It's sort of everything, right? We need diversity in our strategies, right? If you only had microgrids, that would be a problem. If you don't have any sort of ability to, guard against major grid failures, you have a problem. And we saw that certainly in Texas a couple of years ago. We're part of what's called PJM. That's the grid that New Jersey is part of with, I think 13 other states. And so for the most part, the grid is managed really well. I think we've definitely seen some challenges and failures, but learnings from it. And microgrids are going to be part of that in the future, but it's not necessarily, a silver bullet.
The real complication of it, Tom, is, like underground utilities, like the infrastructure problems you have with water, most people don't see it. So it's out of sight, out of mind. So regardless of generation source, nuclear, natural gas, coal, oil, wind, solar, hamster on giant wheel, the remainder of the grid is the same, right? Your transmission cable comes from your generation source, goes into a substation, which lowers the power out into your distribution lines. If you are in an urban area, those are probably underground. If you're in a suburban area, like most of New Jersey, those are above ground. Those come into your home, then they come into your electrical panel and they get distributed out. So, it's getting the understanding of that. So, if you want to take the stress off the grid, you need to build more of everything. You need more transmission lines, because if one goes down, you need another one to move the high voltage power. If your distribution line goes down, but let's just say your neighborhood has a microgrid, right? Everybody sees the 5 boxes, depending upon how you're looking at your Zoom. So if the power line to my face goes down, I can sling power off Eric's, Maddie's, and yours simultaneously, and I don't have to do it that way. So it's kind of more of just like an additional, kind of additional support, but there's no way to replace it. And as Maddie was alluding to before, being part of PJM, and again, I'm sorry, we're throwing a whole bunch of acronyms at you. It's about understanding the differences in power, right? So for kind of the history, since we essentially invented electricity generation, our entire grid on a national scale has been built to have power run through those grids at 100% of the time, right? Because when you operate nuclear, natural gas, coal, oil, hydroelectric, those lines are fully powered at all times. Your wind, your solars, those are intermittent, right? There's some storms in the area. So if you have solar panels on your house today, you're not generating any electricity. There's some storms rolling through the area. So maybe you're generating more wind than less wind, depending upon the day. And the grid is not set up yet to have different times where there's a lot of power running through it and then no power running through it. That's how you end up with situations where you have critical infrastructure that fails. That's where some of these substations can fail. And it's about really understanding all of that and behind the scenes component. And it's why some of this has been so it takes so long to truly develop this. I mean, we're still trying to figure out how we're going to bring the offshore wind onshore at this point, that we're still kind of unclear on that over the course of all of the leases, right? Ocean One's lease is the only one that includes both generation and transmission as a component. All of the others that have come out via the Board of Public Utility, and if I'm off on this, please correct me, Maddie, but the other leases that are either already awarded or planned will have, we'll have to have separate generation as part of those contracts that were released.
Just one quick point to make on PJM, just to put it in context for everyone. So from New Jersey to Virginia to Illinois, that's PJM. There's 65 million of us that all of our electric utilities are interconnected. For those of you that I pray were busy on Friday, December 23rd and missed the email from your electric utility, PJM sent an email to every single person in every utility customer received an email on December 23rd saying, please turn down your thermostat and turn off your Christmas lights if you don't need them. And that this has nothing to do, I mean, there was a lot of kind of disingenuous information relative to renewables in Texas in 2021. And the same, I heard some people say there was nothing, the problem with the grid had nothing to do with renewables in December. It had to do that the grid couldn't handle all of the demand, and that's relative to nothing being electrified currently. What in the world are we going to do if PJM, if 15%, 50%, well, pick the number. I mean, this is a very big deal. So to the extent that you can shed any of that load and have other things that aren't technically part of the grid, that's wonderful. But the one thing to keep in mind, and if you look at Senator Singleton and Assemblyman Benson's bill that is promoting how to do vehicle charging, while it might not be part of the grid as it's legally defined, the cost is still going to be borne by the ratepayers. The legislation allows the demonstration program to be paid for by ratepayers. And right now in the residential space, we don't pay that demand charge. And the reason that they have to look to do this is, especially for commercial vehicle charging, the demand charge, again, that's a charge only commercial and industrial ratepayers pay. It's too big for a trucking company to absorb. They've got to socialize the cost, and it's a very big cost. And, you know, costs of socializing nuclear operating certificates and things like that are things that the legislature has passed that are buried into our rates. We're getting to the point where some of this stuff in electrification is now, we've taken the low-hanging fruit. It's the stuff that's too big to socialize. And that's the policy debate that we need to have and that we're starting to have, and that in all of the above approach helps mitigate the cost.
If we look at New Jersey, back on the EV topic, from 2011 until the most recent data was sometime around the end of Q3 2022, we have sold 78,000 electric vehicles in New Jersey. So based on the executive orders and the targets that are happening, that would mean that between now and 2035, so over the next 12 years, we have to add another 250,000 electric vehicles. Now, historical sales patterns show us that we're just not going to get there. Now, could there be some major tax incentives that get people to go buy EVs? Maybe, that's possible. You know, but if we're not going to mandate it, which the governor claims that we're not going to do, then, you know, then I don't see a behavioral incentive for people to go and buy that many. Now, then taking what was issued last week, the goal is to then get to 2 million by 2035, right? So we're supposed to get to, you know, 330,000 by 2025, you know, and then 2 million by 2035. So right now we have 78,000. So just looking at the general math, it just doesn't add up that we're going to sell 2 million electric vehicles between now and 2035. So I just think we need to curb our expectations on this stuff.
I want to get to the math on the incentives, right? And let's go to the electrification of houses and buildings, which is going to make Eric just go nuts, right? His group was one of them that was leading the chart. So I always like to say, look, at the end of the day, when you get home and you're watching the garbage TV that you're just sort of bleary-eyed through, my first choice is always going to be Bar Rescue, because, you know, John Taffer is like a god to me. I'm going to watch those every time. It's the same show at every place. But and then at the end, there's no difference, but it's all great. The other one I'm going to go to is some of the HEG with Tariq and Christina and the flipper flop, and we hope those kids make it out okay. I love the idea that they go and they say, look, we're going to knock out this wall. We're going to double the size of your kitchen. We're going to put in an island. I've got a new door here. And the contractor's like, yeah, that'll cost you $7,500. And we're sitting there saying, you couldn't get that done for $75,000 in New Jersey, let alone $175,000. So let's use the costs, and they throw out numbers like $20,000 per home to put electrification in, if the grid can handle it, and clearly it can't. 2 million for these large multifamilies and schools and buildings to come in. And yeah, there might be some incentives, but anybody who's done any business in New Jersey knows that these numbers aren't even remotely close to being accurate. I can't tee up Eric any better than I just have. Jump in, dude. Let's go. You guys led the fight on this. What say you?
And I thank you for that, Tom. We did, but keep in mind the fight that we led. We have never once opposed electric vehicles. We have never once opposed electrification of anything. We've never opposed wind, solar. We've never opposed anything because we, for the 30 years I've been here, have been an all of the above organization and continue to do so. However, we were pilloried in the fall of 2021 when we went public with the cost of $20,000 based on studies of heat pump installation where the existing fossil fuel system stayed. That was $20,000 in various places in New England. I spoke to a contractor on Tuesday in Monmouth County. They installed in a 7-room house, 3 bedrooms, den, kitchen, living room, and if that doesn't add up to 7, I'm forgetting. $37,000 for heat pump installation. That's heat pump, that's electrician, that's line sets, that's everything. And those weren't the hyper heat pumps that are the ones that even have the lower temperature operability. Now, keep in mind, we didn't discuss electric induction stoves. We didn't discuss insulation, building shell, what goes into that. So, I mean, the cost is astronomical. I mean, Governor Hochul used a lowball number last month, and she said it was $21,000 just to retrofit the heat. And these costs are enormous, and that's just the retrofit cost. That's not the operational cost going.
You're also missing the EV
absolutely
charging
yes,
infrastructure,
the cost for
because
the EV charging.
part of last week's announcements is that we're going to try to stop the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035, which is going to require at-home charging infrastructure unless you're going to use public. Now, the other difficulty there is we just simply look across the river in Philadelphia. If you are living in a multifamily dwelling in there or an apartment building, there are a lot of folks that don't have electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I would, tell anyone to go on and Google this. They're literally hanging extension cords out the windows into the middle of the street in Center City, Philadelphia. I mean, that's just not acceptable.
Should we not have done that? Is that
Not very safe.
So look, this goes back to, I think, Maddie, you said at the beginning, energy infrastructure upgrades. This is a messy thing. It's trying to figure out where the energy is coming, trying to find the grid, trying to figure out what's going to be torn up. It's nice just to snap your fingers. I know you guys have faced challenges from areas that you were expecting and you weren't expecting, and we're still in the first inning of this. Talk about when you look ahead, half of your time has got to be on, we've got to build these things, and the other half is we've got to manage what we're doing here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, look, it's a new industry here in the US. My company and others have lots of experience in other parts of the world, largely in Europe and the UK, but it's a different market and it's a different regulatory structure. And we have definitely come across a number of challenges, both expected and not expected. I think, going back to the transmission piece, getting the power onshore, I mean, that is one of the biggest risks that we see. It's also a big part of the cost of building these things. And so, obviously the state of New Jersey in the last year was working on a shared transmission approach in partnership with PJM, and the state of New York and the New England states are starting to look at this. It is definitely needed. We need to have better planning, and also just better reliability. So if you're looking at, it's called a meshed grid system, but essentially that's a fancy term for building a small grid offshore and having it connect to the onshore grid, but creating reliability opportunities so that, as Michael was saying, if let's say one offshore substation or one line goes down, you can reroute power to others, right? And that's something that's definitely needed to ensure more reliability with these intermittent resources, right? I think that that's going to be really critical, and it's going to have its own challenges. It's building large-scale infrastructure offshore and bringing it onshore, and also connecting to where the power centers are, right? So where we're building some of these projects, certainly the first projects in New Jersey, they're off the south coast of the state, and we know that the power centers are up north and the demand is up north. And so there's just a lot of logistical challenges that is really going to require some real planning. And one thing that if I take my Orsted hat off, just, as a resident and a citizen, this is infrastructure. This is something that requires federal planning on. We do a lot of federal planning and investment on other types of infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, trains. I don't know why we don't apply the same standard to the energy infrastructure needed that is absolutely essential to the way that our society runs nowadays. And so that's something that I think is going to be really key. And hopefully it's something that we'll start to see more of. I know the U.S. Department of Energy has been putting out different grant and loan opportunities. They are looking at this, but we really need not a state by state, county by county, region by region approach. We really need a whole national countrywide approach on how we're planning for our energy future.
And you brought up the shared transmission, and we covered a lot of that, and I know about this much about it, so I'm glad that you guys are here. But essentially what the state had said, and you talked to the mesh grid, as we tried to explain it, was we're going to build one super highway from the ocean so everyone can connect and get on that highway, a sort of a turnpike in the ocean, and bring all that energy on shore. And look, the BPU had, I can't remember the numbers, I should, it was like 17 companies with 82 proposals, had all of these great ideas they brought in. They had all their union partners, they had all their energy partners, they had all of this. And at the end, when the big, as somebody said to me who was very upset at the end of the thing, they said it was Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. Like everybody set up and had pitched all of these projects. And finally, it's like the state woke up and said, boy, this is going to cost more than like 10 or 12 bucks. We need to rethink what's going on here. That alone, in my mind, restarted the difficulty of energy infrastructure and the massive costs. Maddie, Mike, go.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I understand both sides of it, right? I mean, full disclosure, Orsted was one of the bidders. We were not successful. We bid in partnership with PSEG, but I also understand the cost concerns, right? We were just talking about cost concerns for building electrification. They're very real. And while the approach that BPU took in partnership with PJM was the first of its kind, it was great to step out to initiate that conversation, look at all of the other states that are starting to talk about it. If we're part of a multi-state grid and only New Jerseyans are paying for transmission upgrades that benefit the whole grid, I mean, that's a challenge, right? And that's also why we need to be thinking about this on a federal level. The reason why we fund federal transportation the way we do is because everybody has the opportunity and does benefit from it. And so you're able to spread out the costs over a wider range of people so that it's not as much of an impact and everybody benefits from it. And that's a very, very simplistic explanation, right? But if we're not then treating energy infrastructure and, my electric bill is going to go up by so much because we are intelligently investing in the future of our energy infrastructure, but nobody else has to help pay for it. We do have a problem there. And so I want to be at least, intellectually honest about the challenges that BPU saw in their process, and they're real. It was, of course, a disappointment in some ways, but I can certainly understand where they were coming from.
Mike, your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think it's much of a secret that probably one of the loudest critics of the Board of Public Utility is me, and
that's why you're here, dude.
I know, but when they awarded the for lack of or a simplistic description for the onshore upgrades and the plugs on the beach, right? We need this stuff, right? That's no secret. So that was that's smart money, because regardless of how long it takes us to get different renewable capacity, we have to update the grid. But I do think it was, a little dishonest if at the last minute we were just going to, for lack of the better term, pull the football out here. I think we should have been having that discussion months, if not years in advance. If the ultimate plan was to turn around and say, yeah, no, we don't think we're ready for that, that shouldn't have come at the time of bid awarding. That should have come months and years ahead of time. Or have a larger, more transparent, realistic priorities discussion, right? And that's been the real knock from everyone on the approach that's been taken on most approaches on the energy policy. It was our way or the highway, when everybody, when a lot of intellectual, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of folks that had a lot of interest in this space, had a lot of concerns. If we were all able to sit and say, hey, let's make a priorities discussion. hey, we have the funds and the wherewithal and the gumption. We're going to get Ocean One and Ocean One's transmission component done. Then let's go to that. We're trying to do everything all at once simultaneously, and that's just never a recipe for success. And again, back to the larger piece of it, which is, we continuously come back to cost here, and it's been an hour and I'm shocked that it took me this long to mention this. It's been 5 years and nobody can tell anyone what the cost of any of this is going to be, right? Board of Public Utility has released, an energy master plan, an update to the energy master plan, and now we're rewriting an energy master plan, yet we can't tell anyone in the state of New Jersey what it's going to cost. How is that even possible? Right? How can we move, do you buy a house not knowing the cost? I mean, it's the logic is baffling.
All right, we're going to get to the energy master plan in a second. I'm getting some good questions from the audience, which we love. This one, I'm going to go to Maddie first. Someone's asking, what are we learning from other states such as Rhode Island? I'm going to add, I know Orsted's a global company. This isn't your first rodeo. With each subsequent building, in theory, we're going to get better and smarter, right? And I think that's what New Jersey was trying to do with the shared transmission. What are we learning? What are we seeing that we can bring as we get through this process to go forward?
It's a great question. So we currently operate the Block Island offshore wind farm. It's very small compared to what we're talking about here in New Jersey. But we've seen a number of things on the positive side. So first of all, Block Island was able to totally convert to offshore wind power, providing them their energy. And so they were able to get off of diesel by going down that path, and it's been sustainable for them. They haven't had sort of some of the challenges that we've heard about large scale intermittent coming on that need to be managed. Block Island's been able to effectively do that. We've also seen some really great ecotourism with trips around the wind farm, since it is much closer to shore. It's about 3 miles offshore. And we've also seen some really great recreational fishing increases because of the artificial reefs that are created by that wind farm. So that's been a really good process also for just operating and managing a wind farm. And frankly, there are going to be, just like with any infrastructure, times where we need to go out and make repairs or make changes or adjustments. And so we've been able to do that really effectively with Block Island. So that has been a good learning experience for operating in the United States. We are currently under construction on our South Fork project, which is off the coast of Long Island. Onshore construction started last year, and we'll be getting the offshore construction piece of this shortly. So we'll have, more lessons learned in terms of Atlantic coast U.S. offshore construction prior to diving into Ocean Wind 1. So I think that will additionally be helpful. And just from a quick stakeholder standpoint, since that's a lot of the work that I do, I've had the pleasure of working with a couple of my colleagues in New York. And I think that the South Fork project has done a really great job of actively engaging with the community on, frankly, a daily basis to give updates on what's happening with construction. What can they expect to see in their community today? What can they expect to see tomorrow? Here are opportunities to connect with folks, to ask questions. Here are your points of contact that are going to be on site. And so I think that's been really great. The other somewhat selfish piece here is we're working with Burns and McDonnell up on the Long Island on the South Fork project, and we'll be working with them again here in New Jersey. And them and Jingoli & Sons are our local contractors here for the onshore work in New Jersey. And obviously both entities know what they're doing. They've been really wonderful to work with. They know this market really well. And so we have a lot of opportunity to apply lessons learned, and certainly we have them from Europe as well, but we're going to have a couple of real lessons learned right here in the US that we can use as we start building Ocean Wind 1 later this year.
Me personally, this whole event has been crushing to my self-esteem. Mike's telling better jokes. The audience have better questions. And Frank Fielder, quite frankly, is a better writer than anything I've ever done. The piece he had today is beautifully written. And I know everyone's hoping, gee, I hope Tom reads to us during the program. This is that part. So it's just so good. He writes After 4 years of advancing every possibility except the fact that they were wrong, the Murphy administration has conceded the obvious. Its energy master plan was overly ambitious, based upon faulty modeling, and ignored ratepayer costs. So what lesson did the administration learn? Instead of offering to build a broad-based coalition around a practical, cost-effective, and evidence-based plan, it proposed simply, the prior plan didn't work, so let's do it even faster without a plan, which redefines insanity. So, I mean, we can back up the Polisher truck. This is better than anything that I've done. It leads to another question in the audience that says, hey, it's great to poke holes in the governor's plan. Give us a timeline. Give us thoughts on the energy master plan. What can we do? How can we work together? Eric, you and I talked last week, and again, you've been a strong critic of the governor too, but you came away with his speech saying he does want to work a little bit. So I'm going to let all you guys get in, but I'm going to start with you, Eric. Let's talk about where we can go with this energy master plan reboot and how it can work better for all of us.
And I'm going to start with two words that Maddie used that are essential in this silo, and that's policy signals, right? We need to know that going forward, that, hey, you know what, the big thing the governor did last week, and the governor loves sports analogies, so that's where I came up with pivot, because in basketball, a pivot is when a basketball player makes a slight adjustment to the path they're taking to score a basket. It doesn't mean they're dribbling the ball down the other end of the court to score a basket for the other team, right? The governor didn't renounce electrification last week at all. He actually kind of recommitted to it and did it. I'm going to just look real quick at I'm going to just say something real quick because everybody wants to hear Eric read if they want to hear Tom read. This is the governor's executive order on the future of natural gas utilities. Now, keep in mind, the Energy Master Plan says everything in buildings is going to be 100% electric, and I think the original plan was 90% by 2050. And we have criticized it. And look, the heating oil has been, fighting a valiant and challenging battle against the natural gas industry for, 70 years, right? But in the lane of the existing fossil fuels and the infrastructure, looking at how to decarbonize them is the one thing that we've never been against building electrification at all. What we've been against is building electrification is the only way to achieve building decarbonization. And last week, the governor realized that in his executive order, he's talking about establishing a clean heat standard for natural gas. He's talking about including ensuring that gas distribution company growth assumptions, right? He's talking about converting existing pipeline infrastructure to provide decarbonized heating and cooling. So the governor is now in the silo of building electrification, adopted an all of the above strategy, whereas he has not done that comparably in EVs. And we look, it's a lot less expensive to decarbonize heavy trucking by using the existing infrastructure than it is to convert fuel. But the notion that, so what a clean heat standard in a 10-second overview is, it's a way of driving down consumption of the existing fossil fuel. And one of the ways of doing that is decarbonizing the fossil fuel that's being distributed. But there's also electrification. There's also other things. So what the governor has effectively done in the building electrification silo is, instead of saying electrification is it, we're saying electrification is, the governor's thumb is on the scale very clearly, is going to be 1, 2, and 3, but there's other things. It's going to, you have to run a marathon uphill in a blizzard with a parachute and no shoes on to achieve the standards, but nevertheless.
What does that possibly mean? I've never heard that analogy before. I'm going to quote it.
He's been practicing that for a week, I bet.
Like a one-eyed fish and a one-eyed cat in a fish market. I don't know what that means.
But what that means, Tom, is that there's a path forward for the existing fossil fuels that's purposely challenging, but still allows them the opportunity to compete, as opposed to being decapitated at the start line and not being allowed to run the race at all, which is what the original Energy Master Plan is. And that is the small but significant pivot in the building electrification silo that the governor has made. And he also recognized the role that heating oil and propane play by talking about delivered fuels as being stakeholders. So last week, the governor, for the first time in 7 years, invited the small delivered fuel companies relative to the natural gas utilities to the table, and recognized that we have something to contribute. And that's what I take from that in the building electrification silo.
All right, if we're going to follow on,
here's how I will respectfully challenge your assertions, Mr.
DeGezero.
The rhetoric is fine. The action says otherwise. Because over the course of the last 5 years, there has been, half a dozen projects that have been assaulted or canceled. Your Northeast supply enhancements, your PennEasts. I mean, the administration took PennEast to the United States Supreme Court and lost. I mean, so the actions of the administration versus the rhetoric is a little different. And again, just last week, there was a motion filed at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, on an air permit case where they asserted a report that we have debunked by some organization called the London Institute of Economics that says that we don't need natural gas or fossil fuels in the state of New Jersey. All of its assumptions were flawed, but it was inserted into federal record anyway. And that became public Friday, which was 2 days after last week's announcement. So there is a huge disconnect between what the rhetoric is and what the action is, and that's been the rub for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years. If we can, to Maddie's point earlier, if we can just be intellectually honest about this, then we can have a positive, forward-moving policy discussion. And it hasn't been intellectually honest since the very beginning. I mean, going back to the original Energy Master Plan, right? So again, I'm throwing acronyms at people, but you had the Energy Master Plan, which was your blueprint document, and then there was a corresponding document called the IEP, right? The Integrated Energy Plan, which was essentially the underlying assumptions, right? One of the first assumptions in there was that we were going to electrify all of New Jersey, yet somehow we were going to use less electricity. Somebody tell me how that's possible, but that was one of the first assumptions, right? And it was done through, the claim is that there's a proprietary formula for energy efficiency that's going to get us there. I mean, so if we're not going to be intellectually honest about this from the beginning, how can we operate in a policy setting as stakeholders?
If I could offer a slightly different view, and this is less specific to New Jersey policy and the policies that the governor has put forward. And obviously, as Ørsted, we're very supportive of the clean energy focus that this governor has had. But I will say, with Ørsted globally, we made the decision as a company to divest of our fossil interests a little over 10 years ago and focus entirely on clean energy assets. And so historically, Ørsted, which was known as Danish Oil and Natural Gas, was a fossil fuel oriented generating company and made the strategic business decision to focus on a sustainable approach to providing energy. That is part of our business model. That is part of our mission as a company. But what's really important, and our global CEO talks about this, is part of our work is making a market-based case for this, that there is a business-oriented solution, that it's not just about policy goals, which are very important, like we said, policy signals, but that there is a private sector business case to be made for decarbonizing. And that is the focus that we have had. It is in a very different stage in Europe. Climate policy and clean energy are not political issues there, right? So the ability to move fast is sort of empowered by that, because it doesn't get tied up in any partisan politics. Also, the way that governments are structured there, building infrastructure is not quite as challenging as it is here, but that is one thing that is part of Ørsted's business model and mission, and something that we're working to do. And we've seen success in Europe, and we're working to do here in the US. And our hope is that as we have proof points, it will indicate to other parts of the marketplace, again, outside of government, to other parts of the marketplace, that it is possible. So I just wanted to share that perspective here, sort of irrespective of some of the policy discussions we're having.
But I do think there's a piece that you need to add to that, though, because just last year, the European Union, when they were redoing their clean energy standards, they opened it up to include both nuclear and natural gas in order to use European Union dollars to invest in that infrastructure, because they know they need it. So if Europe is ahead of us saying, hey, we've done a lot of investments in clean energy, but we also need to invest in renewables, nuclear and natural gas simultaneously, I think we in the United States should be taking that cue. And it's part of the reason where, we continue to get frustrated on this, is that, the actions here in the United States and in New Jersey specific to this discussion are totally counter to that. Because if we take a look, we're going to look at this from the holistic view. When he left office in 2009, former President Obama penned a wonderful op-ed in Science magazine that talked about what he did, during his time. And during his 8 years, in addition to making some of the largest investments in renewable energy, they also did some of the largest production of oil and natural gas in our history. And what happened? We reduced our climate emissions for the United States by nearly 15% while growing our GDP nearly 15%. Now, obviously, this was pre-global pandemic, pre-issues in Europe. But to Maddie's point, there is a market-based case that shows that we can grow our GDP while reducing emissions if we make these smart timelining investments, right? And I saw Mr. Henning's comment in the Q&A, and we'll tie this whole thing back together. It's almost impossible to put a timeline on this, because if we put a timeline on it, we're almost destined to fail. We should put some aspirational goals on the timeline, but there shouldn't be phase outs. I mean, because obviously, as we look over history, we're starting to see that, as we try to hit these goals, we continue to miss them. If we're looking at the data here over the course of the last 30 years, right, EPA's most recent data shows that the United States has reduced its overall emissions by 30%. I mean, these are good things, right? But we have to look at it in a holistic standpoint, because while we've reduced our emissions, the developing nations and the largest populous countries, your Chinas and your Indias, are increasing emissions, right?
Yeah, but Mike, our emissions are still way higher than everybody else. So
sure,
I don't want to lose that.
No. I'm not diminishing it. But what I am saying is that if we're not going to have an actual conversation about what's happening in China and what's happening in India, right? New Jersey's emissions are 0.3% of the entire amount of global emissions. So whether we shut everything off tomorrow, we're not going to have a singular impact of that other than wrecking our economy and making sure that our lights don't turn on. So I think we have to have a real discussion about that.
I'm going to jump in because an anonymous attendee, very nice, has thrown in a big question. How can you argue for a market-based case when there's such production tax credits coming to Orsted and EV sales and everyone else? Who wants to jump on the market-based case, in air quotes, when in an industry that has so many subsidies?
Yeah, no, I can start. So, I mean, we've seen this in a lot of places, right? It doesn't matter if we're talking about clean energy or natural gas or other types of industries. When you've got something new, providing incentives to help make the cases investable, since these are new, it's risky, and risky money is more expensive money, right? So having opportunities through sort of policy, right, for governments to incentivize businesses to go down certain paths is really important. It's why we have film tax credits. It's why we have all of these sort of mechanisms to help make embarking on certain endeavors that have positive economic impacts and positive ancillary impacts, like around sort of climate goals. By incentivizing folks to take that leap and make those private investments, you're seeing an overall benefit to society. So tax credits are used in a variety of different industries, not just in the energy sector, but they're an important tool to start to get to sort of market-based approaches to things. We certainly had incentives to convert from coal to natural gas, which is a big part of our emissions reduction. It made a huge difference, particularly in New Jersey, but across the country. So incentivizing different types of activities like that help at the outset as you're trying to get companies and folks to make what we would call maybe behavior type changes.
I would say from a market-based approach, the shale development of natural gas had more to do with coal going by the wayside as a generating fuel than anything else. And that if you're looking at cost, so even in the lane where government is throwing money for, example, electric heat pumps, it's a pittance. First of all, the $14,000 number that you hear bandied about is only if you make less. You're only getting a $14,000 grant for your home if you're less than 80% of the area income. And at that, I mean, take Rocky Mountain Institute recently said it's $35,000 for a whole home conversion. I told you about the contractor that did 37. No matter what it is, no matter how much incentive the government is making for it, there's still way more cost. And you're going to see, I think you'll wind up seeing EDA kind of being in a position, it'll be orchestrated for them to backfill the difference between what those that are eligible for the grant get, which is only a small segment of the population, and the ultimate cost. The problem here with cost is when I want to replace my heater, I'm going to have to take out a mortgage. And that's the bottom line here. And that's the concern concern. And even, I mean, for the joke that the BPU's report, I mean, joke is being generous in terms of the cost study, where they completely ignored the retrofit of the capital cost. That report said it would be 10 to 20, it would be beneficial for low and moderate income ratepayers by a factor of 10 to 20%, depending on what level of decarbonization they took and what measures they took. Yet the same administration said it would cost 4 to 5 times more to operate a building on natural gas than it would electricity. So the administration can't even get, not only did they not provide a cost estimate, but the operational estimates were 180 degrees away from one another. So
no, Mr. DeGesero, let's not be disingenuous to the Board of Public Utility. It is a ratepayer impact study, because they ignored all the costs and they pretend as if the taxpayer and the ratepayer are two entirely different people in the state of New Jersey. Like, again, we have to be intellectually honest about this.
I'm just trying to think of the high school social studies teacher that had Mike and Eric in class, and what that was like, and well, I don't need to prep. I just throw one question. I got this kid in the third row who answers everything. So I'm going to segue as we try to wrap this up to my 10th grade Latin teacher. I'm going to completely butcher this line, something about I didn't come to praise Caesar, I came to bury Caesar, or vice versa. I'm channeling my own Dennis Miller here. Let's talk about this. Look, it's easy for us to sit here and poke holes in everything the governor does and the BPU does and everybody does. That's what we do. That's what we do as people. That's what we do as journalists. That's what we do as New Jerseyans. I get it. All good. That being said, let's have an understanding of this fact. What New Jersey is doing or trying to do in the area of clean energy is leagues above just about every other state in the country, certainly on the East Coast. The efforts that we're making in offshore wind, aside from the clean energy, the economic benefits where we can become an offshore wind hub for everyone else is fantastic. And we could be having this discussion in North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia, where all they've been saying is, well, New Jersey's doing this and New Jersey's doing that. How come we're not doing that? So it's easy to poke holes, but let's give some recognition to the idea that we are doing some good things, starting with the fact that we're addressing a known need. So I'm going to go around to each of you and say, let's talk about the state of energy, the state of our energy goals, the state of the energy master plan, all around where New Jersey is on a scale of 1 to 10 from where we need to be. I'm going to sit there and say we're ahead of most other states. Let's talk about where we're at and where we hope to get. And again, the road is difficult, the road is challenging, the road is rocky, but at least we're on the damn road and so many other people aren't. All right, so with that burst of profanity aside, Eric, I'm going to start with you. Jump on in.
I'll say that we're probably overall, I'll be ambitious and say a 3. I'd like to say that we are now beginning to embark on, the discussion that you're talking about New Jersey globally. In New Jersey globally, we are represented, the 9.2 million of us are represented by our elected officials in the legislature, where a discussion like this in nuance is the day-to-day part and parcel of how we're organized as a society. We're making a societal transformational change. That's the objective with this. We're changing our energy, our housing, our environment, our building policies. These are discussions that need a much broader base than has been just being dictates from the executive for the past number of years, and that we are now embarking on hopefully this pivot, and that we certainly as an organization have been critical of the governor, so that's why we want to be aspirational in seeing that, hey, as it relates to this, we're moving in the right, there's a desire to now at least have a discussion about moving forward in the right direction. And I think that will be far more constructive than what we've seen heretofore. And I think there was a recognition on the part of the administration that, what they were doing before wasn't working, and they're going back to the drawing board.
Mike, we're into 10, where we're at, where can we get to, where do you want to be at?
I mean, if we're talking about the 2019 Energy Master Plan, you can't give it any more than a 0 because we just scrapped it, right? I mean, the governor's office just scrapped it, right? We have to acknowledge that. Now, the fact that we're here having a vibrant discussion with, labor, fuel merchants, and an offshore wind developer, I mean, that's leagues above where everybody is, and nobody's throwing fruit at one another. So, so we're at a 10 on that particular standpoint. But at that point, I think it's a matter of understanding where we want to go and what the priorities are, right? And that was that was always the actual failure of the Energy Master Plan, is there was 100,000 priorities priorities, and every one of them was a priority simultaneously, right? So you can't do everything all at once. So if we're going to do our focus on reducing our overall generation emissions, then we need to, focus on phase one of offshore wind, and we have to have a realistic conversation about the true zero carbon emission generating source, and that's nuclear, right? We have to have a real conversation about whether we should be building more nuclear plants. I mean, the president of the United States was in Poland 48 hours ago and signing an agreement where Westinghouse is going to help Poland build a nuclear plant. We need to have those types of conversations here because, we can build all the offshore wind and we can build all the solar that we think is possible. There's still intermittent sources until battery backup becomes a thing. And that's a whole separate conversation. So
but Elon Musk is going to take care of the batteries. I don't even think we need to worry about that at all. That should run.
Oh yeah, we're going to be fine. The largest battery factory on planet Earth can hold 1.5 minutes of what we need in the country. I mean, we're talking about. I mean, if you want to get into the lithium ion battery, right? It's 1970. It was invented in 1974 or 1978, right here in New Jersey by ExxonMobil in the Round Valley Research Facility, right? I mean, it's 8-track technology at this point. Right. So we need to be looking at what the next thing is, right? It's at its 70 or 95% capacity of what a lithium ion battery can do, right? The only way to make them better is to make them bigger, right? That's not more efficient.
But
that just makes them heavier.
I got 17 of those 8-tracks just for a penny from Columbia Record and Tape. So I'm all good with that technology. Sure. Maddie, as you noted, look, offshore wind is the poster child of a lot of the governor's clean energy goals, and there's a lot of them, a lot of challenges that go on. We started with you. I'm going to let you take us home. Give us an idea of, being in this state, where we are on clean energy goals and infrastructure, 1 to 10, where we at, where do we think we can get at? Take it from there.
Sure. So I think if we're talking about the clean energy goals and the focus on infrastructure, I'm going to give a much higher grade. I mean, I think we're at least an 8 when we're talking about goals. And I understand the comments from Mike and Eric, and I think a lot of them are really valid, right? I get it. But I think from putting out aspirations that are sending signals and important policy signals, the state has really been a leader in this space. On the infrastructure side, it is challenging. But I see a lot of progress being made. I mean, the work that we've been able to do thanks to the award from the state, whether it's, investing over $100 million at the Port of Paulsboro to have a monopile facility there. I mean, those are going to be real long-term jobs, let alone the jobs that were created to construct the facility. And it's still, still ongoing. But unlocking some of that economic investment and creating a domestic supply chain, a New Jersey supply chain, those types of investments do change communities and change people's lives. And so I know we didn't really touch on that as much here, but what we're talking about really is part of the energy transformation, and people are very much at the center of that. And being able to create real jobs, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's the engineering firms that we're working with, the construction firms we're working with, legal support. I mean, it really is a major economic driver. And New Jersey's done a good job of being able to capture a lot of it early, because when you get there early, you're able to capture more. But we are part of a larger network. I mean, so I know for us with Ørsted, we have supply chain companies that feed into the work that we do in 40 states across the nation. A lot of it's here, and we're building it in New York as well. And New Jersey is doing a great job of capturing a lot of that, like with the wind court, with focus on job training and workforce development, and then obviously the partnerships that we have with the trades. So I think from that standpoint, New Jersey's really at the head of the pack, and will hopefully continue to be.
Awesome. Listen, I think I could get the three of you together once a week from now until the end of time and have a vibrant discussion about all of these issues. I really appreciate your insights. This was a really great group. You guys behaved, which was great. There was a lot of good cross traffic. We hit a lot of areas. I think that was super. And I appreciate the people out there who stayed a little extra, because this was worth going a little extra. So that was great. So listen, I'm going to shut it down now. In theory, this is like ROI, it's RAI. I'm told that like some computer voice is going to come on and say, thank you for participating. I'll believe it when I see it, but that's great. In the meantime, I'm just going to thank everybody. I can do Ted Baxter and say good night and good news, or I can do Ron Burgundy and just simply say, stay classy, New Jersey. Everybody, thanks for being here. Thanks for participating. We'll see you next time, next Bat Channel, whatever it is, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys. Be well.